1. Some background before we start. I live in the most northern part of Norway, which is also the most northern part of Europe. My home lies well above the Arctic Circle. This means, for those of you unaware, that we have very short summers where the sun never sets, and very long winters where the sun never rises. These long and cold months of darkness, in the end and beginning of the year, have made us into a understandably superstitious kind. There were many tales meant to safeguard us growing up. You have Stallo, the mountain troll who steals children who wander far away from their home. You have the Myling, who you will not see, but you can hear it stalk you, letting out the cries of a baby, and the Knock, who lies in waiting beneath the surface of lakes and rivers, waiting to drown any unsuspecting swimmers. My story begins when I was 16 years old. I had just gotten my hunting license, and my father had bought me a shotgun for my birthday. This was big for me, as I had always followed my father on hunting trips as a child, but never had I actually shot grouse myself. My father is the stereotypical northern Norwegian. He knows everything about the outdoors and can endure any hardship or weather with the same unwavering sense of macabre humor. Once his fingers got stuck in a saw at his workplace, and it peeled the skin off his middle finger like a banana peel. He promptly bandaged it up by himself and kept going. He did not consider going to the doctors to get it looked at before almost 2 weeks had passed, and the stench of the bandages made him unbearable to stay in close proximity with. In the end, he needed a skin transplant and several weeks off work before his hand was remotely usable again. So the time of year comes when the sun is out for a few hours in the morning. Me and my dad take the journey to the cabin. This includes an hour of driving and a further hour of boat. You see, our cabin is in a remote area without any road access, so the only way to get there is by a ferry. This means we somewhat always know who is out there, since most people only stay over the weekend, when there are no holidays, and the ferry only goes Fridays and Sundays during the weekend. That being said, there are never more than a handful of people out there at the same time, spread out on an area that is roughly larger than my hometown. This time, on the other hand, it was only me and my father taking the ferry that Friday, so I knew we were going to be left alone over the weekend. Arriving on that small pier by the cabin, I could finally breathe in the fresh air of untouched nature that has always been soothing for my soul. It's like you leave behind all your troubles at home, because out here they are irrelevant. At the cabin, the only things that matter is the things that keep you safe, warm, and fed. We then dug out our snowmobile that was parked near the pier and drove the short trip over to the cabin. That night, we spent mostly preparing noose traps and lunch for the next day. My father told old stories of when he went hunting back in the days and such, and we shared in a ceremonial hunter shot of single malt whiskey. I slept well that night, as I normally do when the peace and quiet of the cabin comes over me. We got out of the cabin late the following morning, due to us just enjoying the calming of a morning with no obligations. This would turn out to be a mistake, however. You see, the key point is to be out early so you can utilize the sunlight as much as possible. We knew this, but sometimes you just want to sit down and eat a lazy breakfast and watch morning TV. When we had arrived at the Lavu, imagine a winter version of a teepee, that we had set up that summer next to the lake, which was now frozen, of course, my father decided that he would take it easy that day and get the Lavu warmed up, so that when I returned from the mountain there would be warm food and drink waiting for me. I had previously spent a lot of time by myself around the area, so walking around the mountain alone never bothered me, and still does not to this day. So I started walking up the mountain overlooking the lake. It was difficult due to the heavy snow and me not bringing my skis. Instead, I opted for using an old pair of snowshoes that were hanging in the cabin. This resulted in me using way more time than needed to get up to where I could find some grouse I might shoot, as I knew from previous experiences that this was an area they would be in. After a lot of effort, I made it up, and the area, despite being full of tracks and feces, was abandoned. You see, it had snowed that night and part of the morning, so the tracks must have been somewhat fresh, yet I could not hear or see anything. So I stalked the forest upon that mountain for an hour without any traces of life. That is probably when I noticed silence. It's like what people with similar experiences say, there is always this deafening silence that preludes something bad. Like all the animals know to get out of there. I remembered for the first time since childhood that I felt uneasy about being alone up there. But of course I was not about to go empty-handed back to my father. So I continued. As I was walking around listening intently to any sound that might have given away other forms of life, I remember being amazed at how loud my footsteps were. At this point, I was a tall yet skinny boy, around 154 pounds, even though I walked slow and controlled as humanly as possible. The uneasy feeling creeping closer and closer to the point where I decided to take a quick snack break and regain my previously calm state of mind. As I walked back to a clearing overlooking the lake, my footsteps seemed to almost lighten, and I felt more relaxed and at ease again. I sat down on a rock and ate a bar of chocolate that I had brought and enjoyed the sun on my face, ridiculing myself for being spooked of what essentially was nothing. That's when I heard the footsteps, coming from the direction I had just been in, loud and heavy footsteps of a grown man. I know this because, as anyone can tell you, the sound of a biped walking on 2 feet is quite distinct from our four-legged creatures such as moose or bear, especially in heavy snow. I tried calling out because immediately I thought it was my father who had a change of heart, yet no reply. I sat there on the rock watching the direction of the footsteps as they grew louder and louder. Several times I called out, and yet I received no reply. Feeling uneasy again, I decided to take out my phone and try to call my father. There in my phone, I had an unread message from my father delivered 3 minutes ago. Coffee and lunch is ready. Simultaneously, the footsteps were somehow getting louder and louder, and I knew whatever was at the other end was not my father. This, and knowing that there were supposed to only be 2 people in a radius of many, many kilometers, made me instantly jump up. I grabbed my shotgun and noped out of there as soon as I had tightened my snowshoes. As I was making my way at all haste, I could hear whatever was stalking me pick up the pace, and I realized that the sound of my own footsteps and whatever it was that was after me were almost synchronized to the point that there was only a slight difference in when our feet hit the ground. I realized since that whatever it was has followed me since I entered the forest on the mountain, and was the cause of why I felt like my footsteps were abnormally loud. I remember trying my best to run in hip-deep snow, not caring that the thick layer of branches hit my cold face, leaving red marks all over. It came to the point where I could hear the extra pair of footprints no more than maybe 5 meters behind me. Yet when I turned around, there was nothing. I pushed all I had, and when I finally managed to reach the frozen lake on the other side from the lavoo, the extra pair of footsteps just stopped. Exhausted by the kilometer-plus run in high snow, I made my way to the lavoo. My father seemed almost amused by how tired I seemed. He handed me a hot cup of coffee and asked if I saw anything. I didn't know what to say and was honestly embarrassed by what had occurred, so I said only that I had spotted many tracks, yet no birds. However, in later years I have asked him about this and other strange occurrences around the area, and the answer has always been roughly the same. Don't worry about it, and don't ask about it. Some things are better ignored. Two, I ghost hunt at the Mansfield Reformatory in Mansfield, Ohio a lot. In fall of 2019, I had discovered someone lingering in the East Showers. No one had known about him, so I kept him a secret for a bit. We got really close and I learned some things about him, and he's visited me at home, which isn't a problem for me. Mind you, I use my pendulum to speak to him. Months later on another hunt, we discovered that he was being abused and was very badly hurt. He was hiding in a corner, scared for his life. So my father helped him out and escorted him to the hospital to get checked out. We went up a couple hours later and he felt safe there, so we encouraged him to stay. After this happened, that's when I started to tell people of his existence and inform them of what happened to him. When I first met him, I had found out that he didn't know he was dead. I felt like it wasn't my place to tell. And if it ever did become my place to tell, I knew that it was soon. June 2020 rolls around. I invited some friends along with my dad to help me speak to him, because I knew there was something that had to be talked about. Up in the hospital, another spirit had been harassing him and telling him what to do, and he couldn't escape it. My dad was helping him understand that he doesn't have to listen to this guy, especially because he has no superiority over him. He was basically just a guy who was trolling him. My dad started slowly easing into it, asking him how it's possible that he hasn't eaten in a while, explaining to him that he's able to go through walls and leave rooms whenever he wants, telling him that he can leave whenever this troll is harassing him. My anxiety and intuition started to rise, but the anxiety wasn't my own. I knew that straight away. Something was telling me that he was nervous about what my dad was saying to him. I ended up taking over and explaining how we're all dressed differently, and how we're all wearing masks because of a pandemic, because it's 2020, not the 1890s. I said, "Do you know what I'm getting at?" And my pendulum responded with yes, and right after that, I could feel tears coming, and I said, "I can't do it." I couldn't tell him he was dead, but he already knew. I started crying really hard, and I felt a huge pang in my chest. The kind of pang you feel when you've just been told a loved one has died. And I knew I wasn't crying. It was him crying. I have never felt another's emotions before, and the pain I felt, I knew was his, and so did everyone else who witnessed it. A friend who took an audio recording of the session told me she heard a male voice say "dead" after I asked if he knew what I was getting at. And when she played it for me, I heard it too, and we knew it was him. I cried for a good couple more minutes and was telling my dad how heartbroken he was to hear that. It was very hard for the both of us, but eventually he grew to accept it. Ever since then, I have become sensitive and can sometimes feel the emotions of the spirits I speak to. Sometimes it's strong, sometimes it's not there. It was one hell of an experience, but I love him to death and I hope I never lose him. That's how close we've become. I was told we have a special connection, and I don't doubt it because I feel it. Anyways, thanks for listening to my experience. 3. I've been wanting to share my experiences at my father's house that I've been visiting ever since I was a kid for a while. I'll provide some obligatory background information as well. This very large house was built back in the late 1700s, and includes 3 apartment-like sections that all include a living room, bedroom, bathroom, and other rooms. My grandmother used to live on the bottom floor. The other section was unoccupied for a while, and my father lives on the top floor. Now, the house was occupied by many families over the years, including becoming a temporary hospital for some time. Yeah, already a possible hotspot for some residual energy. Apart from the house, we have a very run-down barn next to it that we use to store equipment, but used to be an actual farmhouse when my grandfather was alive. We also have a huge dirt basement that is the scariest thing you will ever see. A couple more unnerving details include an infant tombstone on a hill on the side of the property, another grave marker near the street, and an abandoned attic of the barn that is occupied by families of bats. Bat poop everywhere, so yeah. Already some pretty creepy rooms in history, but let's get into the stories. When I was very little, my dad joked around to never mess with Old Man Holden, who was the occupant of the grave marker at the end of the street. Of course, I mocked him, the ghost, as a joke. Right after, I was running to the trampoline when I tripped hard over nothing and hurt myself badly enough that I still remember it. My uncle, who regularly visited to help with maintenance of the house, would hear children giggling in the unoccupied room of the house. Nope. I also tend to pick up on some negative vibes in certain rooms of the house, give me the worst feeling, including the adjacent room to my bedroom. I always put something in front of the door before I go to sleep. The creepy thing about it is that a drawing from over 100 years ago of the house has a man drawn in that exact room. No thanks. Now, onto the physical stuff. The second floor of the house has windows that are the same level of the flat tin roof. We have a wooden deck that is level to it, which allows us to walk on the roof if necessary. Pretty fun, actually. One day, my father started noticing some rusty nails on top of the roof that appeared out of nowhere, literally just sitting on the roof. I mean, they are nails, so maybe not too out of place on a roof. However, soon after, 100-year-old pennies started to appear on the roof as well. I even saw them once while I was on there. Pretty positive my dad wasn't making it up or placed them there, since he is a stoic man, and even he was visibly startled. One of the scariest things was finding black bobby pins outside of the door of our section of the house. No women lived in the house for months. They wouldn't be there when I got there. Only after one of us left the house where we would see it, like they were placed there on purpose. One last really scary thing happened when I was little and visiting my grandmother on the bottom floor. I was pretending to be magic, and hid a plastic Pokeball toy underneath the couch cushion, hoping it would disappear when I lifted the cushion after a few seconds. I did this a few times for fun, but when I did it again and I lifted up the couch cushion, it was gone. I started freaking out and crying and looking everywhere for it. My grandmother was very confused and helped me look for it, but probably thought I was pulling a prank on her. I gave up after a while and stayed with her for a few hours until my father came back from work. I looked under the couch cushion one last time, and to my surprise and horror, the Pokeball was there. Don't know how it happened, and it freaks me out now, but it was there. Those were the only good pieces of evidence that I have that supported anything paranormal, other than the typical slamming of doors that would occur every so often. 4. Reflections in mirrors or other objects have often shown me things which do not appear when looking at an area without a reflection. I have just moved from an apartment building built in 1909, obviously renovated and used to be a hotel. One night, I felt a particularly heavy presence in my apartment that sent me into high anxiety. It was a nightmare. I glanced up from smearing butter on my toast, and could have sworn I saw someone in the reflection of my toaster. The toaster is black, and so the reflections are quite clear. I saw a large man sitting on my bed who appeared to be holding a revolver, and 3 people laying on the floor. None were moving. Also, the shadow of a satchel bag appeared to be a large arm and hand. I jumped at this, buttery bread knife in hand, and saw nothing. I looked again and saw the same reflection. Believe me, I squinted, adjusted the lights, and rubbed down the toaster. But the entity reflections were still there. I decided to keep going on as normal, but my clothing rack seemed to move slightly, which freaked me out. This happened several more times, each time eroding the thought that these were just tricks of the light. Eventually I called a buddy and brought over some booze, pretending to just want to chill. The liquor helped, and leaving my place, there were no more creepy reflections. I'm somewhat skeptical, so I'm assuming I need more sleep, and the lights were playing tricks on me, but part of me believes that these were spirits of people who died in that room over the century. 3 people on the floor, and 1 fat man with a revolver. Also, to make things weirder, I sometimes heard harassing and mocking voices, which I assumed were coming from the neighbors. So one morning I went over and knocked on their doors. The first guy answered, and I asked if there were people in there yelling through the walls, and that I realized how weird this scenario was. He looked concerned and said no, opened the door so I could see just him and his girl in there, and I apologized and left, blaming it on the lack of sleep and street noise. He was chill about it. Then the insults started up again, so I went to the other neighbors, realizing I would look somewhat crazy. Knocked and was greeted by a girl. I asked vaguely, "Is what's-his-face in there? Sorry, I know this is weird." And she looked at me like I had 2 heads, telling me it was only her in there. Again I apologized and said I probably needed more sleep, and we laughed it off. So, either I was hallucinating, there were neighbors I didn't know who were for some unknown reason harassing me from the second apartment, or the damn building is haunted and spirits were playing games with me. Either way, creepy as fuck. After that, I remembered other instances where I thought I saw faces and reflections and just brushed them off as nothing. all took place in houses either very old or belonging to people who dabbled in the occult, or some type of Ouija board type stuff. Reflections are weird, man. 5. As I'm writing this, I'm a teenage girl with a fucked life, and I'm a very social and happy-going person. But this story will be flashbacking into my past, my scary past. I've always told myself I was cursed or had bad luck, something like that. But everyone I talk to about it says otherwise. Since I remember, I've always had strange things happen to me. I used to live in this house growing up, and one day out of the blue, I started having bad nightmares, strange and disturbing. People chasing me throughout my house, graphic nightmares about blood and violence. Keep in mind these are recurring nightmares for a 4 to 6-year-old child. For about a year or two, unexplainable things started happening around our house. I used to live with only my brother and mom and 3 dogs, which will come into play. At night, I would be kept awake by voices, deep and scary ones, loud shuffling and footsteps on my wooden floor. And here's the part where everyone says it's my dogs. It couldn't have been. Everyone in each bedroom had a dog sleeping in, including mine, and my brother's room was in front of mine. You could always hear this loud and creaky door come open. It never did. And as for my mom, she coughs every time she gets up in the middle of the night due to health problems. And I heard none of the sort. And the problem with these footsteps is they sounded like boots. That went on for the longest time, and I got used to it. And as the years went on, it kept happening. More things started to happen. Like my door coming open a couple times a day and no one there. My doorknob furiously turning and wiggling. As one morning I woke up with my door wide open, and my doorknob broke on the floor. My mom never believed me, so I stopped telling her these things. No one believed me since I was a child, who was always tired because they were kept up all night by these occurrences. Time skips a couple years later, when my mom remarries and we move out to my new stepfather's house. Things seemed to calm down for the first 2 weeks for the first time in a couple years, until I was picking out my room. I was left to the smallest room after my brother chose, and this room gave me a terrible feeling every time I walked past it. It's important to note people have died in this house, and multiple around me. Everything seems fine at first, until I hear the voices again at night, with no dogs walking around in the house, and everyone being asleep. In this house, we can hear every loud door open, so again, I know nobody's awake. For the past 4 years I've lived there, my door is slammed shut, which is very hard to suddenly pull my door shut. Every night there's footsteps in my room, walking around in the attic above, and the part specifically above my room. And more recently, I've had things suddenly move around after moments away from it. And now my mom is starting to believe me along with my brothers, real and stepfather. At this point, I don't get scared when things happen like my door suddenly slamming open or shut. A while back, I got in contact with the girl and family who bought my old house, after seeing multiple times when she posted on her Snapchat story about things in the house scaring her, and how it seems to be getting worse. Now, writing this, I found they've moved out because of how bad it is. I joke a lot about how cursed I am. I get cold very easily. I'm named after a hurricane and born right after the one I was named after. And every year my birthday comes around, something bad happens. I get very sick, and it storms or a car breaks down. A series of bad events always happens on my birthday. I and my best friend were recently talking about it because it seems she's the only one who takes me serious about all this. She likes to think I attract ghosts. I'm always cold. My life kind of really sucks. My family situation isn't the best. I'm always sad or depressed. And I have a very low, weak immune system. Which this could all be some silly coincidence, but I really don't think so. Something has to be pulling this all together. One day I'm afraid something really bad is going to happen. For the moment it's little things like this, but when I really think about it, I never feel alone. And when I physically am alone, I get terrible feelings, very cold, and unable to sleep. I would like everyone's take on this. I want to find true help with this. I just feel like something is going on, I just can't tell. Maybe there's something wrong with me. I just feel like it's something more than that, though. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 5 True Paranormal Stories, episode 206. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. This goes up on Friday, as per usual, this 18th. Apologies for missing the Saturday stream last week. I slept right through. It's just one of those days where the body decides you've not been sleeping right, and so we're going to sleep all through the day, whether you like it or not, mister. And when your body does that, you're wise not to argue. So that's why we missed last week's. However, it's my birthday on Saturday the 19th, so I like to do a birthday stream there. I mean, it's not like I want to spend it with anyone else, you know. I'd just be sitting at home alone, eating snacks and watching TV otherwise. So we'll have a stream tomorrow night of some form or another. Okay. And with that, I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.